So it sounds like you've always had sort of an interest in like the media side of things, right? You did mention
Oh yeah,
you're doing a what was it, a computer science and what was the other degree?
mass media communications.
Right. How did that come about? Like that's a weird combination of degrees.
Yeah, it is. It comes from the fact that I was struggling very hard to decide what I wanted to do with my life. I'm the
Mhm.
kind of person who likes many things. I enjoy doing many things, and eventually, it boiled down to two things that I'm really, really good at and that I really, really enjoy, which are video editing and software development.
Mhm.
Um, but that aside, I was having a really hard time choosing what to major in, and or in what I to actually study. And in the end, when it came to choosing, I ended up choosing computer engineering, and I hated it. But I hated it because the university where I was studying that was very focused on the hardware side of things, and I
Right.
wasn't really into electronics. I played with it and I dabble in it, and I do enjoy doing that, but it's not something that I'm very passionate about. And so I then, in those university years, decided to switch to mass media communications because it was the closest thing to filmmaking. And while I was there at this new university studying mass media communications, suddenly somebody tells me, "But we have a computer science degree here." And I was like, "What?" And suddenly it was like, well, I need to try it out. I need to try this because otherwise I will never know if this is something for me, if programming is something that I would like.
Mhm.
And fortunately, by that point, um I already had an idea that I would because I had started programming at a very high level with an open source application. It wasn't open source at first, but with an application for visual software development. Um, QPrompt, my career, and all of these things are due to content creators like you because back then, this was like back in 2010, 2008, I was listening to the podcasts from Jupiter Broadcasting, and they made the Linux Action Show and other various shows. And in around 2012, Brian Lundick, who was in that Linux Action Show at the time, he released this app called Illumination Software Creator.
Mhm.
It's long gone, no longer developed. He sold the rights, but the open source code is still GPL, so everyone can fork it if they want.
Mhm.
But it's a very old code base at this point, so
Mhm.
it's not really worth the trouble, in my opinion. But it was very helpful to me as someone who wanted to dabble into programming to see how what could I do uh, and that's how I ended up making the first version of dual print, which I later redid in Qt. And thanks to that, I realized, I like programming, I like computer science, engineering maybe not for me, but definitely the 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 programming aspect it absolutely is. So that led me to pursuing a double degree. Why a double degree and not just switch from one major to the other? Um, I was determined in making sure that my family knew that if I finished the communications degree, I wasn't going to die of hunger. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. A communications degree does. There are people that use it, but like, it's a computer science degree. There's that sounds a lot more reassuring.
Yeah, and it is really in practice. A lot of my peers, I later found out while I was doing a bit of research with iCorps to create QPrompt or to release QPrompt. I reached out to a lot of them, and I realized that many of my peers had, by this point, moved away from mass media communications and communications overall, and were focusing in other fields. And some of that has to do with the economics and and that's the main factor. And the other reason was because sometimes people found a job that they really liked while they were still in college, and once they graduated, they ended up deciding, you know what, this is pretty good. I'm gonna stay here, and it
Mhm.
worked for them. So, yeah, a lot of people end up going in crazy different directions.
Mhm. How was your computer science degree actually handled? Because computer science can like it can mean a couple of different things. Like it can mean very theoretical, or like I did a software engineering degree, and that was it wasn't at all hardware related. Like entry level courses, like the first year stuff, there was some like generic stuff like networking and a bit of hardware, but later on it specialized purely into programming. So how exactly was like yours done?
It was mostly software, very theoretical.
Mhm.
Um, uh, we learned C++ early on,
Mhm.
which ended up helping me a lot nowadays. Um, but back then I was, I thought it was outdated and that we should have been learning Python. Um, I ended up learning that on my own. I absolutely love the language. But yes, it was very focused on the fundamentals, which is very good for understanding how computers work. But when it came to real world preparation, I think we all felt it was a little bit lacking.
Right.
I had to complement that with courses from Coursera primarily in order to have more real world skills
Mhm.
that I could use at my company, Imaginary Sense.
Mhm. I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I was going through my classes, a lot of them it's now part of LinkedIn Learning. At the time it was lynda.com. A lot of my classes they were just like watch the lynda.com videos and do what it says in that. Like why am I paying you then? Why didn't I just get a Lynda subscription?
Yeah, it's so frustrating where they do that. It's like, okay, you are giving me a really good video, but I would like to hear it from you because then I can maybe interrupt you, ask a question, and get
Mhm.
some relevant response to what I'm thinking right now.
Mhm. For
And
context, this is like I was in university before COVID. My final year was COVID. So the first 3 years they were doing this.
oh wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, I had some good classes, but I don't know. It's weird, right? Like it's when it's up to the lecturers to decide what the course content's gonna be, you can get some incredible classes, and then there's some other ones where you're like, I don't entirely know like why it's like this. I feel like my web development class, even though the tech we used was relatively outdated, um, we were using at the time it was jQuery Angular, not the like not Angular JS, but Angular, and .NET. What is their like? What's their web?
.NET Core?
No, it was before .NET Core. I don't. It was some .NET framework for doing stuff. And it's like, even though I feel like the content itself was like not, or like the tech we used was not great. I feel like at least we learned some important fundamentals on like how the web functions.
Yeah.
And then there were other classes where I'm just like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? Like, what is happening?
I absolutely had that feeling with my if don't even remember the full name of the class, but they were teaching us essentially how to write the byte arrays into like floppies and hard disks, and it
Okay.
was oh yeah, it was like very focused on this is how you store on this ancient media formats, and I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, why do we need this?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, that year was the last year that they gave that class. Fortunately,
Mhm.
it was removed after that. But yeah, university can be a little bit slow to catch up.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time as I was studying this degree, my best friend was in a different university, and they were still teaching like Visual Basic 6 over there. So
Mhm.
yeah, it can't get worse.
Yeah, my degree when I was going through it, it was you had a first year Python class that was your introduction to programming, and then after that, the majority of it was Java because that university has a lot of like military contractors, so they love Java. They absolutely and also what is it, DXC D something. There's a big company in Australia that hires tons of university graduates and they love Java as well. So that's what they were doing at the time. They've now migrated most of the degree over to Python, which I think makes more sense when you're teaching like core concepts, right? Like if you're trying to teach how data structures work, like linked lists, binary trees, things like that. I think getting the language out of the way and just focusing on the core concept of what you're trying to teach makes more sense then. I don't know anyone going through the degree now, but I would sort of worry that going from Python and then in like third year there's the C++ course, like making that jump. It was bad enough going from Java to C++, but going from Python at two years of that straight to C++, like I feel like a lot of people are going to struggle with that course even more than they already did.
Yeah, it can be quite a big jump, especially coming from Python. In that sense, I do nowadays, in retrospective, hindsight is 2020. I do end up agreeing with my professors at the time that C++ was a good language to start with.
Mhm.
I I'm still not 100% decided, I will admit, because I do think that there's value in understanding logic first before you start turning that logic into machine code.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, regardless, it's a matter of how do you ease people into the machine code eventually, not take too long for that, but have make sure that they're uh, anything that is related to logic is well covered,
Mhm.
because in the end, that's what they're going to use the most.
Mhm. Yeah, once
It's
you
not the
have those,
mathematics, it's the logic.
yeah, once you have those core fundamentals down, yes, there are different languages you can use, and obviously, if you want to start talking about like functional programming with Haskell and things like that, like your brain breaks then. But normally, if you're not talking about those languages, once you've learned those core foundational skills, it's just a matter of learning some syntactic differences between languages. Like if you've learned C++ and you want to learn Rust, for example, yes, the borrow checker does weird things and it's a weird thing to wrap your head around, but most of the rest of the language just makes sense once you've got that syntactic knowledge down.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is definitely key. I've been not lately, but I was learning last year Rust as well,
Mhm.
and I realized that my colleagues who had more experience with C++ versus me, who did a bunch of Python after university and a lot of JavaScript, they were having an easier time understanding the more complex stuff about the language. But yeah, it is something that it is quite the more exposure you get to different programming languages, the easier it becomes to switch from one to another.
Mhm.
I remember what language it was. I think it was when I started with Python. I literally watched a 1 hour video on how to Python, and just hyper focused on all of those essentials, and that's how I got started with it. And it was quite easy for me at that point because I by this point had a lot of JavaScript experience, and C++, not a lot, but I had some, and all the other languages that they do teach in university,
Mhm.
like a bit of Prolog and SQL and all the other stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah. That prologue, I don't see it used anywhere, but I think it's a powerful system, a powerful thing that should be
Mhm.
used a bit more. It's just not really relevant nowadays. But when you think about the kind of problems it can solve, like recommendation systems, it can be easily developed with that. It's something that we can still like borrow from old technologies and bring it maybe in combination with the new AI stuff, machine learning that is being developed.